Hi, welcome to Wellness Wednesday. Today, Dr. Sorin he won't be joining us. He is out doing some continuing education, and the roads are kind of bad today, so Dr. Shealy was not going to risk coming in for that. So instead of Dr. Sorin or Dr. Shealy, today you get Shuck. My name is Rachel Shuck. I am the nutritionist slash wellness coach over here at Real Holistic Doc or Shealy-Sorin Wellness Institute. So today our topic is about blood sugar. And if you are sitting there listening thinking, well, my blood sugar is great, this topic doesn't apply to me, hang in here with me. Put your seatbelt on, strap in. You might be in for some blah, blah, blah. You might be in for some surprises. Okay, so first and most importantly, we can kind of maybe start looking at some of these slides, but blood sugar is an upstream cause of a multitude of health conditions, okay? So when we have high blood sugar, we have all these trickle-down effects of what goes on. And actually, this is a part where I say if you don't have high blood sugar, stay tuned, because before the development of high blood sugar, we will actually see something else develop first. So that's the upstream to the upstream, but we will revisit that here in a little bit. One of the biggest dysregulators of our metabolism is having high blood sugar or high glucose. So I'm going to use those words interchangeably. Sugar, glucose, same thing. So when I say that word, that is what I'm referencing. And if you have high blood sugar, then that means something has already gone sideways in your metabolism. But for the sake of clarity, let's talk about what do I mean when I say high blood sugar, or what do we mean? What does the health world mean when they say, oh, your blood sugar is too high? Okay, there are a couple of different ways to measure this. One, you can do a fasting blood glucose test, and that one's pretty self-explanatory. We know you don't eat for about 8 hours, and then we test your blood. Any number 100 or over tells us that your blood sugar is probably too high, okay? That's one indicator. The other one that is a bit more comprehensive is your hemoglobin A1C. And so that number, we use 5.6 as the cutoff. So any number over 5.6 is going to tell us that fasting blood glucose, but I'm not sure that we all know exactly what hemoglobin A1C means. So if you look at this slide that says hemoglobin A1C, this is to break it down for you on a very fundamental level. The way we measure this is we look at your red blood cells. And then you can see inside of your red blood cells, we have hemoglobin, right? So we know that's part of the red blood cell. When we have too much sugar or glucose floating through our blood, that glucose molecule will start attaching to the hemoglobin, okay? And when a hemoglobin gets glucose attached to it, we call it glycated, okay? So that's a glycated hemoglobin. Why do we care about this? Well, something that's really important to know is when we attach a glucose molecule, or when we attach anything to a protein, hemoglobin is a protein. And when we attach something to it that changes its structure and form, then that means it doesn't function the way it's supposed to. So this slide right here is kind of just a zoomed out version of that. So if you look at this hemoglobin A1C slide, you see a red blood cell, lots and lots of little glucose molecules attached to all the hemoglobins. That's the one on the left, that's high. And if you look to the one on the right, that is low. Here's like the really interesting part about testing this. We tend to think what we did 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 3 months ago doesn't matter. It absolutely does, because this is measuring your blood cell, the life of your blood cell. And so what you ate 2 months ago will show up. If you've eaten a lot of cupcakes, then those are going to attach. Okay, yeah, we're not there yet. So those will attach to the hemoglobin and then change its function. Okay. Again, when a protein gets, what I was saying, glycated, it can no longer form its job properly. Okay. So this causes an increase of highly reactive free radicals inside of your blood cells, and it alters the property of your cell membranes. And your cell membranes are what allow nutrients and keep good things, allow good things in and push good things out and that kind of stuff. So when it alters that, our body can't function optimally. In the case of a hemoglobin molecule getting glycated, this will lead to blood cell aggregation, so kind of like stickiness, and increase blood viscosity. So that means it's going to make your blood thicker. Of course, all of these things are going to make our blood not flow as well as we want them to, right? So when this happens, just to kind of back up and recap. So we know now when we look at hemoglobin A1C, we're looking at what your blood cell has looked like for over a period of about 3 months. There is some good news to that. If you've made a lot of bad decisions in the last 3 months or 30 years, whatever it is, we make new blood cells about every 16 weeks. So if you start adopting dietary and lifestyle changes, you can start seeing this number come down and your blood cells can be healthier and your hemoglobin and everything can function as it is designed. So let's go. So this slide is showing you a hemoglobin molecule. And of course, when we attach something else to it and we change the shape, it no longer functions correctly. So let's go to the next slide. When we look at this, the next one with the circulatory system, what we know, so yeah, there we go. We know that when our red blood cells aren't functioning like they're supposed to, we're going to cause damage to our circulatory system. And this can happen on a macro scale, so a big scale, or this can happen on a very micro scale, so on a very small scale. For example, one of the kind of common microvascular complications is diabetic retinopathy. And so that's when your blood sugar is too high, it messes up like fluid levels in your eyes and things like that. And while we use the word micro because that's kind of, the smaller vessels and things, the effect can be very big because that can lead to blindness. And on the macrovascular level, we can develop coronary heart disease. That definitely stems from high blood glucose, okay? So I thought maybe let's look at one of the most common things we see stemming from high blood glucose, and that is hypertension. What do I mean when I say hypertension? Many of you guys recognize that as high blood pressure. So if we go to the next slide, we can, the one with the, yeah, perfect. There's a picture of your artery, okay? And we have this, and this is kind of far away, so it's hard for me to see, but you have a very thin layer of cells, one cell layer deep, called your endothelium, okay? And so those are what line the inside of your heart and coronary arteries. When there is too much glucose that those cells have to deal with, they'll start making the vessel contract instead of dilate, right? And so as things are contracting, our blood pressure starts going up. And of course, as we damage those cells in the lining, then our risk for other, circulatory diseases come up, like atherosclerotic disease, and of course, like we just said, hypertension. So this is kind of one way that can happen. Now, the good/bad news here is, can you work to improve this in your body as well? Yes, absolutely. But every cell in our body has a different rate of turnover, and red blood cells we know are kind of fast, about 16 weeks. Your endothelial cells are a little bit slower, so that can take, over a year. Something to think about as you are making diet and lifestyle changes. Okay, but I said maybe there's an upstream cause to blood sugar, even though blood sugar's here, and then we see like hypertension, diabetic retinopathy, coronary heart disease, right? Well, what's the indicator to tell us that you're developing high blood sugar. This is one of the things that so many health professionals don't look at, and it's just so crucially important. And that is fasting insulin. We can look at this and it can tell us years ahead of time whether you're going to develop high blood sugar or, potential diabetic complications. Okay, so in order for me to explain how this works, right, let's look at the pancreas and how it works. Okay, perfect. So you can see in the top picture, that's a healthy pancreas. It's doing its job, it's chugging along, it's pumping out some insulin. Why do we need insulin? Why does that matter, right? Okay, because we don't want glucose just floating around in our blood, damaging everything, right? Your circulatory system is a highway, but you need things to exit off the highway and come get into the cells. So how do we get that glucose out of the blood and into the cell? Well, we kind of have this sort of like relationship with insulin where it does one thing so glucose can do its thing. Insulin gets released by the pancreas. It goes to, say, for example, this is a muscle cell, and it goes into its own little receptor. It's kind of like a little lock and key. And then once it turns that, now over here on the right-hand side, we have this protein channel called a GLUT4 or GLUT4, however you would like to say that, protein channel that will now open up and let the glucose into the cell, right? So if we don't have the insulin, the glucose can't get into the cell. And then, of course, we just have all this extra glucose floating around in our blood, damaging everything. So then you can see, okay, well, that makes sense. This is why a type 1 diabetic has to have insulin, right? They have to give themselves insulin because their pancreas isn't making it. That's kind of the problem. And so then all the glucose is out here, they give themselves insulin, and it's able to open itself up. We can start looking at fasting insulin to see the development of type 2 diabetes. Oh, well, let's stay on that picture. Let's go back to the pancreas picture if we can. So, all good. So essentially, when we look down here at the type 2 diabetes, we see that we're cranking out insulin for some reason. It's not opening up that receptor, right? It's not responding and it's not letting the glucose in. And we love to overcomplicate things sometimes in science and medicine and health and all of that stuff. So why on earth would our insulin not be able to open up that receptor? So now when we go to that next picture with that suitcase, it's because based on our diet and lifestyle, our cells are already so full of intracellular glucose that even if the insulin were to open it up, there's nowhere for it to go. It's full. I mean, insulin is knocking, saying, "Hey, come on, I'm trying to," and the cell's like, "Sorry, there's no room, man. We just can't. Like, there's nowhere to put you." So this is kind of what happens is at first your pancreas is going to just crank out the insulin, crank out the insulin, crank out the insulin. And so your numbers might look great. Your hemoglobin A1C might look wonderful. Your fasting glucose might look wonderful. But how do you think let's go to that next one. How do you think your pancreas feels, right? It's been working really hard, okay? And then eventually your pancreas gets fatigued and then it stops producing as much insulin. And then we start seeing all the things happen where nothing can, it can't get in. So if we look at this next slide, this is kind of how your pancreas feels with everything's on fire, but everything is fine. It's fine. Everything is fine because it looks fine from the outside until you look at the right pieces of information. So that's why I feel like it's just so important to look at fasting insulin. Even if you see great hemoglobin A1C numbers and great fasting glucose numbers, because there might be something more behind the scenes. And then if we go to the next slide where it says, how does insulin work? This is just another visual for you, right? So there's your insulin. pumped out from the pancreas, going to unlock that glucose protein channel, that GLUT4, to let everything in, right? But if that cell over there on the right is just too full of glucose, it doesn't matter if it tries to unlock it. If there's no room, it can't go in, okay? So that's kind of what we know about why we get so worried about fasting insulin, and why it's just so important to know, even if you're looking at your other numbers and they're fine. Okay, so what are some of the issues that we deal with when we've gotten to the point that are, you know what, actually let me back up, because there's some other pieces that sometimes don't get taken into consideration. And one of those is, anytime we take out a body part, there will be repercussions. And sometimes it's necessary, and we understand that. But a really good example of that would be, especially with fasting insulin, men that have their prostates removed. So very often, if they have their prostate removed, then they will have low testosterone. And there's a bidirectional relationship with low testosterone and high fasting insulin. So in essence, like, the chances of developing type 2 diabetes down the road just kind of skyrocket because of that relationship with testosterone and fasting insulin and how that all works together. But just throwing that out there, because there's just so many pieces for all of us to know, and the more you know. So let's take a look at some of the signs of, like, that your blood sugar may be high, and they're not like the really overt obvious signs. You might not even be piecing that together. So let's look at the one that says sleep. This could be huge. So many people have sleep issues, and it may actually, not always, but it may actually trace back to high blood sugar. Okay. So if you have increased cortisol or adrenaline, which kind of has its stem in the high blood sugar issue, then you are preventing full relaxation into sleeping. Another thing that can cause disrupted sleep is bathroom breaks. A lot of people with high blood sugar have to get up in the middle of the night to urinate frequently. And of course, the reason for this is their kidneys are trying to do the best that they can, and they're trying to flush out the excess glucose in the body. So this will be one of the reasons that so many people have a lot of interruptions of sleep for having to urinate. Kind of segueing into that, it can also make you feel dehydrated because your body is wanting to flush out all that excess glucose. And then a really sort of surprising one that I don't think a lot of people connect with blood sugar issues is feeling hot or irritated or kind of unsettled when they're sleeping. So sleep is a big indicator that obviously something is off in the metabolism. Okay, so let's look at the next slide. And that one, we're going to talk about recurrent infections. So that's another thing that we often don't think about when we're addressing high blood sugar. But when there's too much sugar in your blood, your white blood cells have difficulty traveling through your bloodstream. And of course, anytime our white blood cells, which are a really intricate part of our immune system, can't do their job, your body can't fight infection as well. So this could look like many different things. It could look like a yeast infection. It could look like a urinary tract infection. It can look like skin infections, all different types of infections, because a suppressed immune system is a suppressed immune system. Okay. And then the next slide, we also talked a little bit about this at the beginning, and that was diabetic retinopathy. But before it gets that far, you might just notice some vision changes, okay? Because high blood sugar can alter fluid levels in your eyes. And of course, this can create swelling, blurriness, problems focusing. So if you're noticing all of these little subtle signs, that could mean something is going on with your blood sugar. And then, of course, going with blood flow, if we look at the next slide, is sexual dysfunction. So high blood sugar It's going to damage the nerves and the blood vessels that carry blood to the sexual organs. Now, this is way more overt, noticeable in men, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't impact women. So that's another piece of that, because we have disrupted good circulation, essentially. Okay, and then the last slide on kind of just what could clue you in to maybe your blood sugar isn't the best, obviously, besides some of that testing. But and don't forget, too, that even if it's looking good, you should still look at your fasting insulin, is itching. So that seems kind of weird. But again, circulation, if you're not getting circulation to parts of your body, then this can kind of dry your skin out, and that can lead to itching and peeling. So now I've given you all this, kind of just vomited all this information on you. So you're welcome, or I'm sorry, I don't know, whichever one that should be. But this really leads us to ultimately the $1 million question. Like, so if you think you're struggling with this, what do I do? What should somebody do who's dealing with a blood sugar issue, right? Now, it becomes really personalized, and the answer is it depends. You may be at the point where you need supervised fasting. Oh yeah, sorry, we can go to that next slide. You may be at the point where you just need to really be counting your net carbohydrates. Some people might just need a very structured meal plan menu, like just give me exactly what to do, and this is what I'll do. Maybe not. It's always good fundamentally for anyone to cut out the processed carbs. So cut out the white sugar and the white flour. I think sometimes people forget how much white flour is kind of ubiquitous. It's in everything, right? So that means your pasta, your crackers, your bread, like it's a lot of stuff, right? Your bagels, all the things. So that's good on a fundamental level. Everyone should do that. And then also, this is the coolest thing ever. I just gave you that whole spiel about how we have to have insulin, right? Because we got to be able to open up the cell and put the glucose in. But nature is amazing, and it gave us this really, really cool life hack, and that's called exercise. So if you exercise, somehow your body has figured out a way to circumvent the need for insulin, and it can take the glucose in your blood and put it into your cells without insulin. So of course, if exercise is available to you, I highly, highly recommend you start adding that into your lifestyle as well. Okay, so looks like, and I'm sorry, I am doing the same thing Dr. Sorin does with the questions to take those. So it looks like we maybe had so fructose and other sugars also glycate. Yes, now so other sugars is a very broad term. But essentially, yeah, anything that's going to get broken down into your system that's eventually going to look like glucose can attach to your hemoglobin. Fructose does get processed differently in your body through the liver. And other sugars, I mean, that's a lot of times other sugars eventually break down into glucose. So there's that. Okay. Question 2, why do some people with type 2 diabetes take insulin? Well, so it depends on where they are in the process. And what happens is we give them the insulin. So essentially what we're doing is just shoving the glucose into the cell, even though really it shouldn't be going in there. Okay. Okay. Question 3. I had good sugar until I had surgery. They put me on steroids. Can steroids cause problems with sugar? I feel worse when it's low. I have been ketogenic for 3 years. That is a multifaceted question. So I don't know what the surgery was for, but that could also be playing a role. on causing blood sugar problems. So the answer to that is it depends. Of course, anytime we're taking, drugs that are going to affect our system, they can definitely impact blood sugar. And yeah, I feel worse when it's low. That can definitely happen. And sometimes our blood sugar can go low because one of the reasons that happens is we're cranking out too much insulin. We're just like pumping it out. And so that can do it. Okay. Question 4. How important is it to look at sugar? I don't know if I can stress this enough. It is the most important thing. Like, look at sugar. Let's make then what you should be looking at are the added sugars. Or you could even look at net carbohydrates if you feel like that's where you need to go. But when you say look at sugars, I'm talking about pick up the ingredients so that no added sugars have been put in, because that's really where we tend to fail. Nature's amazing. We have lots of foods with sugars in them, but they come wrapped up in this beautiful package full of fiber and enzymes and minerals and vitamins and all these tools that our body can use, whereas added sugar really just it's just something that our body has to process, and it doesn't really give us anything to work with. Okay. Question 5. How can I work with you on my sugar? Well, give us a call. The clinic number is 417-351-5221, and we can set up an appointment and talk. I would love to do that. That'd be wonderful. Question 5. Does intermittently fasting help with high hemoglobin A1C? So the short answer to that is yes. The long answer is it may not be the right fit for you, but in general, it can help. And part of the reason that it can help is because it gives your body time to process, right? So if you're intermittently fasting and you're also working out, you're giving a chance for those cells that have all that glucose in them to start using the glucose that's in the cells and creating space, right? And essentially, nature wants space. It's kind of this weird, crazy thing. Like when you think about fasting, right? That's giving your digestive system a break. But when you think about exercise, it is also doing the same thing. It's giving your digestive system a break because it's letting blood sugar and insulin kind of do their thing without the pancreas having to kick into overdrive. Okay. All right. So let's just summarize some of the most important things, guys. If you're worried about your fasting insulin, if you're worried about your hemoglobin A1C, if you're worried about your high fasting glucose, what do I recommend you do after you watch this show? Okay. So obviously, number 1, read ingredient labels on everything. And please know that they are so good at hiding the name for sugar. Okay. It may not say sugar. It will say sucrose, which is again just another word for sugar. So really look at that added sugars, or better yet, buy foods that are just fresh produce, and then you don't have to read the ingredients on that. So that's a really good step. The other thing is start looking at your net carbohydrates. I'll see if I can't maybe post something later about how to do that. And then, of course, like I said, exercise is nature's life hack. We were so designed to move that your body rewards you when you do that. It says, oh, thank you. I know my muscles are moving, but the rest of my system is now able to take a break. So absolutely, that is what I recommend. And I think, okay, make a plan. Yep, that's for sure. We know that you can't fix it in one day. Also, something else that we talk a lot about on this show, set realistic expectations. Sometimes patients like to, go at it for a month, maybe 2 months, and then they're already ready to go get labs again. It's not time. You're doing yourself a disservice. you want to go get lab 3 to 4 months later, that's okay. You'll see some differences, but remember, just like I was talking about with the cells in your arteries, that's a year-long process. So let's have some realistic, wow, sorry, realistic expectations about what you can achieve in a given amount of time. Yeah. Okay. So someone asked how to start exercising, I think. I'm not sure if that's, oh, I'm telling you, sorry. The whole phone thing is a little complicated. So yeah. And so then definitely start exercising. And we talk about this all the time, but start small. It's okay. You don't need to work out 5 days a week, an hour a day. I mean, can you? Sure. Wonderful. Great. Do you have to start that way? Absolutely not. Start with 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day. Start with 20 squats. I mean, you may not even be there yet, but any movement that you give your body is going to really be able to help it. So yeah. So definitely look at the food. Really, really fundamental. Eat high quality protein and vegetables. Our bodies respond very well to that for the most part. Now, there are some health conditions and things that kind of need addressed other ways, but for most people that are struggling with blood sugar, this is a really wonderful way to do that. So yeah. Okay, I think. Okay, so I'm not sure if we have any other questions, or I think we are good. Hopefully I didn't overwhelm you guys with too much stuff. I know I just threw a lot at you. You can always go back and rewatch it. And if it didn't make sense, you can always reach out. I'm here and happy to help. I come from a teaching background, so I love teaching. And if I can help you in some way, you just let me know. Other than that, I think have a wonderful Wednesday, and we will talk to you soon.